Someone has to be honest with you, so allow me to be really honest. With all the journalistic certainty I can conjure, what we saw this morning was the most seismic constitutional moment the British monarchy has faced since Edward took a pen and gave up his throne in 1936. The man sitting in the middle of the storm isn't leaving this time, which is different. He is refusing to back down. To be honest, the sheer nerve of it is astounding considering all that has been hurled at him. A pre-recorded message from the Balmoral Castle Library exploded like a bomb throughout the Commonwealth at precisely 9:15 this morning. With the unmistakable weight of a man battling something much bigger than politics, King Charles was noticeably thinner than we have ever seen him. He looked straight into the camera with glass-cutting eyes as he delivered the message that has shocked every capital city from London to Sydney. He is not going to resign. He refuses to give up. God bless anyone who attempts to remove him from his throne. He will remain there till the day he dies. However, this is the fact that has been virtually completely ignored by the mainstream media, and it is the detail that completely alters your interpretation of this event. For the full 6 minutes and 55 seconds of that speech, Prince William, the Prince of Wales and future King William, was only 5 feet away from the recording apparatus. The shot did not include him. He was there even though he wasn't supposed to be noticed. And the information we are receiving from Balmoral unequivocally confirms it. I'll say it again. This was not a scene of an obstinate old guy holding tenaciously to a crown he won't give up in defiance of his son's better judgment. This was a father and son standing side by side, carrying out a plan so exact, so planned, so expertly crafted that it should cause all of us to take a step back and recognize the scope of what we are witnessing. The greatest powerful constitutional barrier in contemporary royal history has just been constructed by Charles and William with the express intent of destroying any chance that the Sussex operation will ever be given even a sliver of legal or institutional authority. You must go back 24 hours in order to fully comprehend why this morning is so important. Because time is everything in politics. And let's face it, the modern monarchy is just as much politics as pomp. It would have been Queen Elizabeth's 100th birthday yesterday, April 21st, 2026. After a century of uninterrupted devotion to this country and the larger Commonwealth, King Charles was doing something quite different as the world took a moment to celebrate her incredible legacy and consider what true selfless duty to the crown actually looks like. He was getting ready for battle. This is the part of the tale that truly stopped me cold when our sources confirmed it, so I want you to take a moment to consider it. In the days preceding this broadcast, Charles made a medical decision that, depending on your point of view, is either an incredible act of bravery or something so profoundly unselfish that it verges on the inexplicable. The monarch himself insisted on stopping his cancer treatment regimen for 10 full days prior to this broadcast, according to sources with direct access to the Sandringham medical team. I chose that phrase carefully. The strong sedative was rejected by him. Given the stage of his sickness, he refused the chemotherapy treatments that are, by all medical accounts, absolutely necessary. There was only one reason why he did all of this. He had to speak clearly. He required a smart mind. He had to gaze into that camera and present an unwavering authority that could not be undermined by disease or bodily decline. Consider that. Give it some serious thought. This man, who has terminal cancer, is willingly withdrawing from the medications that are keeping him alive because he realized that this specific time required his greatest effort, his sharpest mind, his clearest voice, and his steeliest resolve. Some politicians, healthy ones, mind you, wouldn't give up a weekend for their nation. Charles put the organization he was born to serve ahead of his own well-being. And then there's the discussion that happened in the hallway outside the library just before the cameras started rolling and the red light blinked on. According to reports, a staff member in the building overheard the father and son's conversation. It's the kind of phrase that sticks in your chest and won't go away. It has to be today, William. It must be a blood oath. We cannot leave a single crack for them to crawl through, the king said in what was described as a raw, rasping whisper. The Prince of Wales, who for years has been unfairly dismissed by some commentators as being too cautious, too polished, and too reluctant to show his teeth, reportedly replied with a single firm nod and the words, "The line is drawn here. We finish this now." That is not a father and son at odds. That is a declaration from a dynasty. This is not just a tale of two royals putting on a united front for the cameras. This is where the constitutional mechanism becomes very fascinating. Paperwork is involved. Documents exist. A paper trail is present. The presence of what can only be called a formal accord between the king and his heir is shown by high-level documents that have surfaced from the Cabinet Office, particularly a memorandum dated April 20th, the day before the broadcast. The main point of the document is strikingly clear. There will be no turmoil when the crown is passed along. In a vulnerable moment, it won't be given up. It will be passed consciously, precisely, and on conditions set by the institution itself. Not by the media, not by public pressure, and most definitely not by the actions of a couple operating what amounts to a business out of a Sydney hotel suite. The jobs are clearly divided by the operating logic. The shield is Charles. He takes full responsibility for the health issue, the constant media attention, and the constitutional examination. While his father acts as the unchanging public face of sovereign power, William plays the role of the sword, overseeing the monarchy's operational machinery and maintaining ties with the armed forces. It is hard to overestimate this arrangement's strategic genius. Charles has basically closed the door on the half-in, half-out paradigm that Harry and Meghan have been frantically attempting to legitimize over the past several years and, more lately, export to the Australian continent by firmly stating that he would not abdicate. An impenetrable constitutional wall has just confronted the so-called Sussex blueprint, which maintains the titles, abandons the responsibilities, monetizes the Royal Association, and so on. Consider its mechanical brilliance. Even with the greatest of intentions, if Charles were to resign today, the ensuing transition period would be a window of extreme institutional vulnerability, a time of change, a weakness in the armor. And opportunists take advantage of these weaknesses. Charles guarantees that when William eventually becomes King William, the transition will take place on the palace's terms, controlled, dignified, and unimpeachable, rather than as a desperate reaction to a crisis that is out of everyone's control, by pledging to stay on the throne until his very last breath. Let's now discuss Australia, because without an awareness of the disastrous week that occurred on the opposite side of the world, it is impossible to fully comprehend the context of this morning's Balmoral proclamation. Sydney, April 15, 2026. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex arrived in Australia for what was marketed to the public as a wellness retreat for women. It was marketed as an opportunity for Meghan in particular to engage with communities, encourage women, and harness the kind of soft power impact that she has consistently stated to interviewers she wants to use for real good. It was described as intelligent, intentional, and compassionate. However, the information that was quickly reported from the ground revealed a very different picture. In every way, this was a guerrilla royal tour. Without the legal license required for an official state visit, the branding, the language of the itineraries, and the carefully planned picture opportunities were all designed to mimic the visual grammar of an official state visit. Then there was Marcus Anderson. Marcus Anderson is possibly the most important character in this entire show, but he has hardly made an impression on the general audience. So pay attention if you are unfamiliar with the name. Throughout the tour's Australian leg, Anderson, who is regarded by many who know him as the main architect of the Sussex commercial brand, appeared in what appeared to be nearly every private setting. Witness reports from the Intercontinental at Coogee Beach depicted an image that greatly unnerved a number of onlookers. Something more akin to a business syndicate functioning with a focus and intensity completely at odds with a sympathetic, community-focused story being presented to the press, rather than a family on tour or even a couple with a reliable advisor. According to several accounts, Harry appeared to have lost the thread of his own narrative. Witnesses described his demeanor as barely disguised displeasure as he walked 2 paces behind his wife and her close advisor. A man was acting as though he were there, but his thoughts were elsewhere. A prince became a passenger in an operation that seemed to have his name on it, but not his fingerprints. If the arrival in Sydney caused some controversy, what transpired in Melbourne on April 18th completely destroyed it. Meghan went to a place that had been designated as a site of remembering in order to pay tribute to the victims of a recent local tragedy. On paper, at least, the goal was to show solidarity, empathy, and the kind of presence that very strong people may exhibit when they choose to turn up without a purpose. Within minutes of her arrival, direct purchase links for each item. Meghan was wearing an update on the AI-driven fashion platform W1, which offers a California-based venture with which she has an association that, depending on which document you consult, falls somewhere between ambassador and co-owner. Click to purchase any item of clothing or accessory that is currently available. The response was not polite. To put it nicely, it was disastrous for a business venture to use a site of communal grieving as a fashion runway. Even many in royal circles who had been inclined towards some sympathy for the Sussex position were tired by the contrast between the seriousness of the location and the blatantly transactional nature of the digital storefront update. One onlooker described Harry's appearance on camera there as viscerally uncomfortable. A man who knew exactly how this appeared and who had no way to halt it at all. This was the last straw for the London Palace. Every organization has a point at which the relationship between a name and its activities becomes so poisonous that defending the name necessitates taking decisive action. Not because they are cruel, spiteful, or incapable of nuance, but because the name itself has become a liability. That point was April 18th in Melbourne. The working monarchy in the United Kingdom was putting on a masterclass in everything the Sussex tour was failing to be, while the optics in Australia were falling apart piece by piece. London, April 20th. During the centennial ceremonies honoring the late Queen's birthday milestone, Prince William and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, went out together. If it had been written by a public relations firm, the contrast between what was occurring on two distinct continents could not have been more stark. Because of this, the Australian tour in Sussex was completely devoid of any commercial undertones, respectful, grounded, and totally focused on the moment and its participants. However, there was one particular aspect of that London visit that garnered international attention and, in my opinion, had greater strategic significance than everything else that day. The Princess of Wales did not show signs of distress when a member of the public unintentionally violated protocol by making excessive personal contact with her. She didn't cause any trouble. Rather, with a calmness like steel wrapped in silk, she moved the person's hands away from her with a precision that seemed almost scripted. A smile that never quite made it to her eyes but stayed on her face. Boundaries were upheld without a single angry word. It was a masterclass in the strictest meaning of the word. Additionally, the unsaid message it conveyed to hotel suites, business strategy meetings, and anybody else listening was crystal clear across the Atlantic and Pacific. The crown is not a product. You can't buy it. It cannot be handled without permission, and those who wish to take advantage of it will never be given permission. Not only was Catherine handling an uncomfortable situation, but she was also conveying a signal, which the recipients clearly understood. This is the bit that, to be honest, neither the Sussex team nor a number of constitutional analysts could have predicted. The Balmoral Address by King Charles was a legal document as well as a private statement of intent. A constitutional ploy disguised as paternal devotion. On April 21st, a prearranged administrative instruction was simultaneously sent to every government house in Australia at the exact moment the King's comments were broadcast over the air. It had an instantaneous and disastrous impact on the Sussex operation. Charles immediately followed the visit to Australia by formally renewing his promise of lifetime sovereign loyalty. In an instant, the ambient glow of royal support that had been presenting itself, if informally, was removed. In terms of diplomatic protocol, the tour was reduced from something akin to a visit from a neighboring royal family to exactly what it was legally. A private commercial vacation taken by two private persons who just so happened to hold titles. In Australia, the political ramifications were immediate. Sensing reflected prestige in the alliance, local politicians who had been eagerly posing for pictures with the Duke and Duchess were suddenly forced to reconsider. Hosting Harry and Meghan held absolutely no official weight if the British King had just made it clear, not hinted, not indicated, but expressly stated, that he retained full authority and had no intention of transferring it. They had recalled the diplomatic currency they had been using as collateral. How did the Sussex team react to this? Paralysis. Complete and absolute paralysis, by all reports. I want to take you through the constitutional mechanics now, because this is where it becomes truly remarkable and where Charles's choice shows itself to be much more complex than a sick man's passionate connection to his crown. According to the Regency Act of 1937, a Council of State is automatically established to perform the duties of the sovereign in the event that a king abdicates or is officially deemed incompetent to exercise royal obligations. The senior members of the royal family are chosen to serve on that council. And this is the important point that the majority of pundits have completely missed. Prince Harry, the second son of the king, maintains a theoretical legal position within that constitutional hierarchy even though he resides in California, has publicly distanced himself from the institution on several occasions, and has taken part in media projects that were, by all accounts, detrimental to the crown. The palace's legal advisors are adamant that an abdication now, under these particular circumstances, may create a constitutional window through which Harry could legitimately fight for a seat at the Council of State table. As a member of the lineage with a technical constitutional status that has never been formally revoked, rather than as a working royal or someone carrying out obligations. A padlock on that window is King Charles's vow to never abdicate. A sturdy padlock with 3 bolts. Charles makes sure that the Regency Act's succession clauses never come into play in a way that could give Harry even 24 hours of formal constitutional relevance by staying on the throne, even diminished, even in obvious physical difficulty, and even at personal cost that most of us cannot begin to imagine. Charles is stationary in the vault's doorway. His second son remains outside. The mechanics of the Constitution are obvious. Harry is excluded from the hierarchy at the exact moment it counts as long as Charles is king. In all honesty, it is among the most exquisite examples of constitutional self-defense in contemporary British history. The more you examine the previous week's events, the more obvious it is that what we are seeing is not a family conflict that just happened to become public. This is an institutional conflict over something much more basic that is being fought concurrently on the fronts of diplomacy, law, finances, and reputation. The issue is whether a rival royal brand may be allowed to operate in the Commonwealth while siphoning influence, gaining legitimacy, and making money off of a connection to the British Crown that the British Crown has expressly forbidden. The British Foreign Office has been keeping a very close eye on this. A formal warning against what officials regarded as the misrepresentation of national representation was sent, according to reports of high-level diplomatic cables sent from London to Canberra marked urgent, which carries significant weight in diplomatic terminology. These records showed that the terminology used in the Australian itineraries for Sussex was too similar to the structure of an official state visit. The memo from the Foreign Office was clear. Regardless of their titles or ancestry, private persons are not authorized to negotiate on behalf of or represent the interests of the United Kingdom overseas. Completely stop. You can tell how seriously the Australian operation was being treated and how dangerous its alleged overreach had gotten by the fact that a government department felt obliged to make that warning at all. Scotland Yard is another. Our sources suggest that a thorough audit of the security spending claims related to Prince Harry's protection arrangements during the Australian visit is being carried out by the Metropolitan Police. What investigators refer to as a commercial conflict clause is the particular focus. Harry may be held personally responsible for a security bill totaling millions of pounds if the Met's investigation finds that Marcus Anderson's business meetings or Meghan's fashion platform activity were successfully facilitated by elite protection officers, whose deployment is funded at significant public expense. In contemporary royal history, the precedent would be unheard of. We are aware that the material from the Sydney Intercontinental and the Melbourne Morning location is still being reviewed. The true scope of what Charles has truly accomplished is revealed when you take a moment to step back from the specifics and consider the larger strategic picture. In palace circles, the term shield mechanism refers to 3 different levels of operation. Every one of them supports the others. Maintaining what I would refer to as the vertical axis of power is the first step. William is the only clear-cut heir apparent for as long as Charles is king. There's no misunderstanding. There isn't a conflicting story. No faction in the palace is able to establish legitimate institutional authority around a separate royal figure. There is a clear, uncontested line of succession that points in a single direction. Charles maintains that line's clarity by refusing to back down at a time when muddying it would greatly benefit some interests. The legal lockout is the second stage, which I have already discussed. The mechanism of the Regency Act. Harry remains outside the constitutional vault. The window is still closed with bricks. It's strategy, not sentimentality, why Charles is standing in that doorway. In my opinion, the third level is the most exceptional and the most unselfish. No matter how many or few months he has left, Charles is utilizing them to serve as what I can only call a legacy filter for his kid. Charles is engrossed in every aspect of the current generation's institutional baggage, the aftermath from the Andrew problem, the Sussex's unrelenting PR campaign, and the harm done to the Crown's reputation on a dozen fronts. He's taking the blows. He is handling the consequences. In order for William to eventually ascend to the throne unburdened, clean, and prepared to head a monarchy that has been cleared of the rubble his father spent his last years cleaning, He is making the difficult choices and bearing the political wounds. Charles is taking care of the institution's dirty work so his son won't have to. I don't know what love is if that doesn't define it. Complex, institutional, flawed love, but love nonetheless. The state of affairs in the Sussex camp in Sydney was deteriorating in ways that were becoming harder to hide away from the constitutional majesty of Balmoral and the elegant choreography of William and Catherine's London appearances. I should emphasize that eyewitness reports from an elite dinner at the Intercontinental describe a situation that would have been extremely unsettling to any knowledgeable observer. While Meghan and Marcus Anderson were engrossed in an intense, low-voiced conversation that seemed to completely exclude Harry, he sat in what was described as a solitary, smoldering stillness, his jaw working rhythmically through a meal he appeared to be devouring simply on autopilot. Several royal watchers have identified this dynamic as the main unsolved conflict in the Sussex operation. Harry offers the royal legitimacy, the lineage, the name, and the historical connection to an organization that, regardless of one's opinion, attracts attention from all around the world. The commercial architecture, platform agreements, brand alliances, real-time conversion metrics, the prince in the picture, and the business in the engine room are all managed by Meghan and Anderson. For the past 8 years, a comment attributed to Meghan during her first Australian tour in 2018 has been making the rounds in the palace halls. When it was originally heard, it is said to have stopped several senior courtiers cold. "I can't believe I'm not getting paid for this," is said to have been said behind closed doors during what was supposed to be a joyful, high-energy tour. Whether or not those exact words were said, the idea that royal duty is a transaction, that service should generate revenue, and that the crown is a brand asset to be leveraged rather than a responsibility to be discharged is exactly what King Charles III Balmoral Declaration was intended to confront and demolish. Charles has offered the most persuasive response to the 2018 complaint by pledging to serve without self-interest, financial motivation, or a profit and loss statement until his very last breath. The crown is not a salary. It has never been, and it never will be under his supervision. Beneath the family politics and constitutional drama, this Australian story has a financial reality that is much darker than the polished social media content represented. This reality is only now starting to fully emerge. Even by the standards of the world's super-rich, the cost of the Sussex operation in Australia, a 9-person team, private security, opulent hotel accommodations spread across several cities, and private aviation, is not insignificant. According to people close to the tour's organization, it was anticipated that the commercial value created would outweigh this expense. The brand association was established, the speaking fees were earned, the sponsorship agreements were triggered, and platform relationships were utilized. It was all based on the basic concept that the Sussex name would have enough residual royal authority in an Australian setting to fetch high commercial prices. In real time, King Charles's proclamation exposed that presumption. At least one significant organizer may now be the subject of a tax inquiry by Australian authorities, according to documents pertaining to the tour's financial arrangements that have come to light. Marcus Anderson is reportedly in a very challenging situation due to an unpaid payment and the ensuing legal threat, which might eventually bring the tour's financial operations into the harsh spotlight of a public courtroom. The expenses continue to rise. The anticipated rates of revenue are not being met, and others who invested money based on royal-adjacent credibility are now looking for explanations. On the morning of April 22, 2026, as you stand at this intersection, 3 different routes forward emerge. All 3 are being observed by the palace. None of these are what the Sussex camp is hoping for. The first route, which insiders refer to as the United Front, has a likelihood of about 40%. Declarations and addresses are not enough for this. Legislation is involved in this. In particular, a possible revision to the letters patent governing royal titles and the terms of their retention. A productivity clause, a statutory requirement that membership in the active line of succession is based upon the performance of official duties, would be introduced under the mechanism under discussion, according to sources. Serve the institution by using the titles. Lose your titles if you refuse to serve the organization. It would be statutory rather than reputational to legally separate the Sussex brand from the Crown brand. Irrevocably permanent. Direct diplomatic action on American soil is the second option, which is currently the most likely at about 50%. Our sources maintain that the King's decision to visit the United States next week is not only a state visit in the traditional sense, even if it is clear that travel now has a negative impact on his health. The mission is lawful. In order to create a bilateral asset protection agreement that would effectively protect the private royal estates and the revenues of the Duchy of Cornwall from any foreign litigation, high-level talks are reportedly being arranged with American officials, possibly at the highest levels of the current administration. Prince Harry has alluded to potential legal problems pertaining to inheritance and security arrangements for years, sometimes directly and sometimes indirectly. It seems that Charles plans to travel to Washington and make sure that before those challenges can be filed, all doors are securely closed. The third route, which I'm referring to as the sudden silence, is unstable and less likely but would have catastrophic consequences if it came to pass. Harry and Meghan might be leaving Sydney in a much more chaotic manner rather than the meticulously planned manner of a tour that simply followed its natural course if the Australian tax investigation into the tour's organizers gains significant traction and the Her Best Life event is officially found to have crossed financial fraud territory. A way out in an emergency. A swift and silent exit from a position that is no longer legally feasible. To put it simply, that situation would have disastrous reputational effects. One picture keeps coming back to me as the dust from Balmoral settles. The legal system works on several continents at once, and Harry and Meghan get ready to leave a city that welcomed them with far more warmth than it is sending them off with. Standing in front of a camera in the library of a Scottish castle, a weak and worn-out monarch gives the most important speech of his reign for 6 minutes and 55 seconds after deliberately stopping the therapy that keeps him alive. His son was standing 5 feet away, completely, unmistakably present but invisible. It is extremely difficult to watch what Charles III did this morning and argue that it comes from anywhere other than a place of profound institutional conviction, regardless of your opinion of him as a man or as a monarch. The British public has had complex feelings about him for the majority of his adult life, Lord knows. This is not something he is doing for himself. He is doing this for both his kid and the organization he has spent 7 decades training to manage. In his own way, he is doing it in remembrance of the woman whose centennial was celebrated yesterday, whose service he believes should serve as the benchmark for all other royal service. The vault is shut, the door is locked, the line is drawn, and King Charles III is standing in front of it, immobile.